You know that moment when you realize your husband's working late at the office wasn't about climbing the corporate ladder, but climbing his boss. Well, that was Tuesday for me. And let me tell you, discovering your spouse's affair through a LinkedIn notification is peak 2025 irony. I'm Monroe Bennett, and I thought I was married to Griffin Bennett, devoted husband of 8 years and mediocre account manager at Davidson and Associates downtown Dallas. Turns out, I was actually married to Griffin Bennett, aspiring homewrecker and part-time fantasist who apparently believed his regional director Marlo Davidson was his ticket to the executive suite. Spoiler alert, the only thing he was getting elevated to was my block list. The whole beautiful disaster started unraveling 3 weeks ago when Griffin began his sudden transformation from couch potato to corporate overachiever. This is the same man who once asked me if networking was something you did with computers. Suddenly, he's staying late for strategy meetings, volunteering for weekend team-building exercises, and developing a mysterious passion for mentorship opportunities with his boss. Now, I'm not saying I'm Sherlock Holmes, but when your husband, who typically dresses like he shops in a discount bin, starts wearing cologne that costs more than our monthly Netflix subscription, certain questions arise. When he begins talking about synergy and paradigm shifts while taking phone calls in the garage, the plot thickens. And when he starts referring to his boss Marlo as an incredible visionary leader instead of his usual description of that micromanaging nightmare, well, Watson, the game is afoot. The LinkedIn notification was what cracked the case wide open. Griffin Bennett congratulated Marlo Davidson on her promotion to Vice President of Regional Operations. Innocent enough, right? Except Griffin had never congratulated me on anything via LinkedIn, including my own promotion last year. The man who forgets our anniversary remembered to publicly celebrate his boss's career milestone? That's not professional courtesy. That's personal investment. I started paying attention to the details that suddenly made perfect sense. The way Griffin's eyes lit up when he mentioned bringing new ideas to Marlo's attention. His sudden interest in staying informed about her projects. The fact that he knew her coffee order better than mine. Which, by the way, is pathetic considering I've been ordering the same vanilla latte for 8 years, while he somehow memorized that Marlo prefers oat milk cortados with an extra shot. But the real nail in the coffin came during our weekly grocery run to Whole Foods. Griffin was examining organic strawberries with the intensity of a jeweler appraising diamonds. Marlo mentioned these are perfect for her smoothie routine, he said, loading 2 containers into our cart. Since when does Griffin care about anyone's smoothie routine? This is a man whose idea of fruit consumption is the cherry in his whiskey sour. The beautiful thing about having a cheating husband is how incredibly stupid they become. Griffin started leaving his phone face down constantly, developed a sudden interest in privacy, and began showering immediately after coming home from work. He also started doing his own laundry, which should have been the biggest red flag of all. In 8 years of marriage, Griffin had never voluntarily approached the washing machine. Suddenly, he's a laundry enthusiast? Please. I decided to do what any rational wife would do in this situation. Absolutely nothing. No confrontation, no dramatic accusations, no tearful demands for explanation. Why? Because I learned a long time ago that the best revenge is served with a side of perfect timing and a garnish of public humiliation. Instead, I called Sutton Hayes, my college roommate from UT, and currently a senior analyst at Davidson and Associates. Sutton and I have maintained our friendship through the years, bonding over wine tastings, book club meetings, and our shared appreciation for watching corporate drama unfold from a safe distance. Sutton, I said when she answered. Hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to know more about Marlo Davidson's management style, where would they start looking? The pause on the other end was telling. Monroe, honey, are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you've noticed anything interesting about how our dear Marlo has been advancing her career lately. Another pause. Then, meet me at Starbucks on McKinney Avenue in 30 minutes. And Monroe, bring a notebook. What Sutton told me over our Venti Pike Place roasts was better than any soap opera script. Apparently, Marlo Davidson had been mentoring several male employees in ways that would make HR question their entire existence. Her promotion to VP wasn't just based on her quarterly numbers, though those were impressive, but on her talent for cultivating very personal relationships with decision-makers. "She's been playing this game for 2 years," Sutton explained, stirring her coffee with unnecessary aggression. "The woman treats the office like her personal dating app, except she's not looking for love. She's looking for leverage." According to Sutton, Marlo had a type: married men with moderate ambition and flexible ethics. She'd identify the ones feeling underappreciated at home, shower them with professional attention, make them feel important and valued, then gradually transition from career mentor to something more intimate. It was manipulation disguised as empowerment, and Griffin had walked right into it like a moth to a perfectly manicured flame. "The worst part," Sutton continued, "is how she discards them once she gets what she needs. Remember Jake Morrison from accounting? He was her favorite until she secured that promotion last spring. Now he's been transferred to the Austin office, and his wife filed for divorce last month. I felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger at Griffin for being such a predictable cliché, and relief that I wasn't losing my mind. My husband hadn't fallen for a better woman. He'd fallen for a professional predator who specialized in midlife crisis vulnerability. But here's where the story gets interesting. Sutton had been quietly documenting Marlo's pattern for months, not out of malice, but out of professional concern. Someone needs to protect the company from the inevitable lawsuit that's coming, she'd explained. She had emails, witnesses, timeline documentation, and even some interesting evidence about how certain contracts had been awarded. As I sat there processing this information, watching Griffin's future unfold in my mind like a train wreck in slow motion, I realized something beautiful. I wasn't just going to catch my cheating husband. I was going to watch him lose everything he thought he was gaining, and I was going to have the best seat in the house when it happened. The only question was timing, and as luck would have it, Griffin was about to solve that problem for me. Griffin's transformation from suburban dad to corporate Romeo reached peak comedy gold over the next week. This man, who once forgot our anniversary 3 years running, suddenly developed the memory of an elephant when it came to Marlo's schedule. He knew when she had board meetings, when she preferred lunch, and exactly which days she worked late. It was like watching someone study for a PhD in their boss's personal habits. The real entertainment started when Griffin announced he needed to step up his professional game to match the energy of high-performing colleagues. Translation: Marlo had mentioned she noticed men with ambition, and Griffin was about to reinvent himself as Dallas's answer to Don Draper. First came the wardrobe upgrade. Griffin, whose idea of business casual was khakis from Target and polo shirts from Costco, suddenly discovered the men's section at Nordstrom. He spent an entire Saturday shopping for investment pieces that would communicate executive presence. I watched him try on suits that cost more than our monthly mortgage payment, while explaining to the sales associate that he needed to align his image with his career trajectory. The sales guy, bless his commission-hungry heart, convinced Griffin he needed Italian leather shoes, silk ties, and something called a power pocket square. Griffin emerged from that shopping trip looking like he'd raided Don Johnson's closet, complete with cologne that announced his presence 3 minutes before he entered a room. Next came the lifestyle modifications. Griffin started reading business magazines, actually reading them, not just leaving them on the coffee table for show. He downloaded meditation apps, began listening to leadership podcasts, and started using phrases like circle back, leverage synergies, and disrupt the paradigm in casual conversation. Watching him practice executive speak while brushing his teeth was pure entertainment. But the crown jewel of Griffin's midlife crisis makeover was his sudden interest in fine dining. This man, whose culinary adventures typically involved debating between Chipotle and Panda Express, was now researching Dallas's hottest restaurants and studying wine pairings. He started dropping names of places like Town Hearth and Knife, discussing the merits of different sommeliers like he hadn't spent the last 8 years thinking wine was something you bought with a screw top. The Friday before everything imploded, Griffin announced he had an important networking event on Saturday evening. "It's a small gathering," he explained, straightening his new power tie. "Just a few key players from the company celebrating some recent successes. Team building. You know how it is. I knew exactly how it was. Sutton had already informed me that Marlo was hosting a private celebration for her promotion at the company's executive conference room, complete with catered appetizers and champagne. What Griffin didn't know was that this intimate gathering was actually Marlo's victory lap, a chance to show off her new office and cement her position with the other executives she'd been charming. "That sounds wonderful, honey," I told Griffin, watching him check his reflection for the 15th time. "I hope you have a really memorable evening." The beauty of Griffin's plan was its complete predictability. He was going to show up with flowers, probably roses because subtlety isn't his strong suit, and some expensive champagne to congratulate his mentor on her achievement. He'd probably practiced his speech about appreciating strong leadership and looking forward to continued collaboration. In his mind, this was going to be the romantic gesture that convinced Marlo he was worth taking seriously. What Griffin didn't realize was that Marlo had been having very similar conversations with at least 3 other married men in the company. According to Sutton, there was Derek from business development, Marcus from client relations, and someone from the legal department whose wife had already started asking uncomfortable questions. Saturday morning arrived with Griffin in full peacock mode. He spent an hour in the bathroom perfecting his look, practicing his confident but approachable smile in the mirror. He'd bought a new suit specifically for this occasion, navy blue with a subtle pinstripe that he claimed projected authority while maintaining approachability. "The key to executive presence," Griffin explained while adjusting his cufflinks, "is understanding that leadership is about perception as much as performance." I nodded supportively while internally calculating how much of our joint savings he'd blown on his transformation. Between the clothes, the cologne, the expensive wine he'd purchased as his contribution to the evening, and the roses he'd special ordered from the florist on Mockingbird Lane, Griffin had invested nearly $3,000 in impressing a woman who was professionally impressed by different men every quarter. The really tragic part was watching Griffin convince himself this was about career advancement. He'd created an entire narrative where Marlo was recognizing his untapped potential and positioning him for bigger opportunities. In his version of events, their connection was about mutual professional respect and shared vision for success. Meanwhile, I was having daily coffee meetings with Sutton, who was providing real-time updates on the office dynamics. Marlo had been dropping hints about her special celebration all week, creating just enough mystery to keep her various admirers competing for her attention. She'd been taking lunch meetings with different men, scheduling one-on-one strategy sessions, and generally orchestrating a perfect storm of male ego and professional ambition. "She's playing them against each other without them realizing it," Sutton explained over our Thursday afternoon lattes. "Derek thinks he's her favorite because she asked him to review the quarterly projections. Marcus believes he's special because she requested his input on the client retention strategy. And your husband thinks he's winning because she mentioned appreciating his fresh perspective on market analysis." By Saturday afternoon, Griffin was practically vibrating with nervous energy. He'd rehearsed his entrance, planned his conversation topics, and even Googled how to make a lasting impression at corporate events. He left the house looking like $1,000,000 and feeling like he was about to secure his future. What he was actually about to secure was a front-row seat to the most spectacular professional implosion Dallas corporate culture had seen in years. But Griffin didn't know that yet. All he knew was that he had roses, champagne, and the confidence that comes from believing you're the main character in someone else's story. As I watched his Tesla disappear down our street in Plano, heading toward downtown Dallas and his date with Destiny, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the universe provides exactly the entertainment you need, exactly when you need it. And sometimes, that entertainment comes with a side of poetic justice that's better than anything Netflix could produce. Griffin thought he was driving toward his future. In reality, he was driving toward the end of everything he thought he wanted, and I had the best seat in the house to watch it all unfold. While Griffin was primping for his romantic rendezvous, I was having the most enlightening phone conversation of my marriage with someone I'd never expected to hear from. Marlo's assistant, Chelsea. Chelsea had gotten my number from Sutton, and her call came just as Griffin was practicing his casual yet memorable entrance in our bedroom mirror. "Mrs. Bennet," she said, her voice tight with nervous energy, "I think there's something you need to know about tonight." Turns out, Chelsea had been Marlo's assistant for 2 years, which meant she'd had a front-row seat to her boss's entire operation. She'd scheduled the mysterious lunch meetings, booked the conference rooms for strategy sessions, and watched a parade of married men convince themselves they were special. But Chelsea wasn't calling out of loyalty to me. She was calling because Marlo had just made a fatal mistake. She asked me to stay late tonight to document the celebration for the company newsletter, Chelsea explained. But then she handed me a list of people to invite, and it included board members, the head of HR, and 2 executives from our parent company. She wants me to make sure they all have champagne and appetizers when they arrive at 8:30. I felt my brain start connecting dots at lightning speed. "Chelsea, what time is Griffin supposed to arrive?" "Mr. Bennet? He's on the calendar for 7:30, same as the other guys. But Mrs. Davidson told me the board members shouldn't arrive until 8:30 because she wants to set the right tone first." The beautiful, perfect irony hit me like a lightning bolt. Marlo was planning to have her cake and eat it too. A private celebration with her admirers from 7:30 to 8:30, followed by the official company celebration with the executives. She wanted to play Queen Bee with her collection of married men, then seamlessly transition into professional mode when the real power players arrived. But here's where Marlo's confidence became her downfall. She'd assumed her timing would be perfect, that she could control every variable. What she didn't know was that Sutton had been feeding information to certain board members about irregularities in project assignments and contract awards, or that Chelsea had been keeping meticulous records of every suspicious meeting and unexplained expense report. "Chelsea," I said, formulating a plan that was so perfect it felt like destiny. "What would happen if those board members arrived an hour early?" The pause on the other end told me everything. "Well," Chelsea said slowly, "they'd probably walk into a very interesting situation. That's when I knew exactly what needed to happen. Not revenge, justice. Not drama for drama's sake, but a perfectly orchestrated moment where truth and timing collided in the most spectacular way possible." I called Sutton immediately. "Remember all that documentation you've been keeping about Marlo's management style? How quickly can you package that into something presentable for senior leadership?" "I've had a complete file ready for 3 months, Sutton replied. "Why?" "Because tonight, the universe is about to provide the perfect opportunity to present it. Here's what most people don't understand about corporate politics. Timing is everything. You can have all the evidence in the world, but if you present it at the wrong moment, it gets buried in bureaucracy and politics. But if you present it at exactly the right moment, say, when senior executives witness the behavior firsthand, suddenly everyone becomes very interested in taking immediate action." Sutton and I spent the next 2 hours crafting what we called the Marlo file. It wasn't gossip or speculation. It was a meticulously documented pattern of professional misconduct, complete with email timestamps, witness statements, and a detailed analysis of how personal relationships had influenced business decisions. The file included Jake Morrison's story, along with 2 other men who'd been transferred or demoted after their mentorship with Marlo ended. It showed a clear pattern of manipulation, favoritism, and the kind of behavior that makes corporate lawyers wake up in cold sweats worrying about liability issues. But the crown jewel of our documentation was Marlo's expense reports. Chelsea, bless her thorough heart, had kept records of every dinner, every bottle of wine, every team-building expense that Marlo had charged to the company, while entertaining her rotating cast of admirers. The pattern was unmistakable. Expensive restaurants, premium alcohol, always with one male colleague, always charged as professional development or client relations. By 6 o'clock, everything was in place. Sutton had discreet conversations with the right board members, suggesting they might want to arrive early to review some concerns before the celebration. Chelsea had confirmed that Griffin and the other men were still expected at 7:30, and I had positioned myself in the parking garage of Davidson and Associates with a perfect view of the executive floor. The beauty of the whole situation was that I didn't have to orchestrate anything dramatic or illegal. I didn't have to plant evidence or manipulate anyone. All I had to do was make sure the right people were in the right place at the right time to witness what was already happening. At 7:15, I watched Griffin park his Tesla and stride toward the building with his roses and champagne, looking like a man walking toward his destiny. At 7:20, Derek from business development arrived with his own flowers and what looked like an expensive bottle of wine. At 7:25, Marcus from client relations showed up with a gift bag and the confident swagger of a man who believed he was about to have a private moment with his mentor. From my position in the parking garage, I could see the lights on in the executive conference room on the 15th floor. I imagined Marlo up there, preparing for her perfect evening, confident in her ability to manage multiple admirers while maintaining her professional facade. At 7:45, the first board member arrived, then another. By 8 o'clock, there were 6 cars in the executive parking section that shouldn't have been there for another 30 minutes. I sat in my car, sharing popcorn with Sutton, who had joined me for the finale, watching the most expensive piece of dinner theater Dallas had ever produced. We didn't need to see inside the conference room to know what was happening. The suddenly frantic movement of figures behind the windows, the way several men emerged from the elevator looking like they'd seen ghosts, and the arrival of additional cars that definitely belonged to senior management, told us everything we needed to know. "You know what the best part is?" Sutton said, crunching thoughtfully on her popcorn. "We didn't have to do anything except make sure the truth had perfect timing." At 8:30, Griffin emerged from the building looking like he'd been hit by a truck carrying his entire life's assumptions. His roses were gone, his champagne was probably decorating someone's office carpet, and his dreams of corporate romance had just collided with the reality of corporate accountability. The real show, however, was just beginning. What happened next was better than any episode of Succession, and I had premium seating for the entire catastrophe. The first sign that Marlo's perfectly orchestrated evening had derailed was when Griffin stumbled out of the Davidson and Associates building, looking like he'd witnessed a car accident involving his own future. His face had that particular shade of pale that comes from watching your fantasies explode in real time while surrounded by your company's board of directors. But Griffin was just the opening act. The real entertainment began when security arrived. Sutton and I watched from our parking garage perch as 2 security guards, followed by someone from HR, escorted Marlo through the lobby like she was radioactive. Even from 15 floors up and 100 yards away, her body language screamed, this was not part of the plan. Her confident stride had been replaced by the quick, clipped steps of someone trying to outrun a hurricane. "Oh, this is beautiful," Sutton whispered, adjusting her position to get a better view. "Look at Derek trying to pretend he doesn't know anyone." Derek from business development was indeed attempting the world's most awkward casual exit, walking toward the parking garage like he'd suddenly remembered an urgent appointment elsewhere. Unfortunately for Derek, one of the board members had specifically requested to speak with him about his recent project assignments. The conversation happened right there in the lobby, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and Derek's animated hand gestures suggested he was having difficulty explaining his professional development strategy. Marcus from client relations had taken a different approach. Full denial mode. He was still in the lobby, apparently trying to convince anyone who would listen that he was there for legitimate business reasons. The gift bag in his hand and the romantic playlist still emanating from his phone somewhat undermined his credibility. But the real fireworks started when Marlo's corporate credit card statements became the evening's entertainment. Chelsea, who had apparently decided that loyalty to a boss who was about to throw her under the bus wasn't worth maintaining, had provided the board with 2 years of expense reports that read like a masterclass in creative accounting. Every romantic dinner at Nick and Sam's, every bottle of Dom Perignon at Town Hearth, every client meeting at the Rosewood Mansion had been charged to Davidson and Associates as professional development. The total was staggering, over $40,000 in business expenses that looked suspiciously like dates. From our vantage point, Sutton and I could see the conference room where the real celebration was now happening, the one where senior executives were reviewing evidence of what happens when personal ambition meets corporate resources without proper oversight. "The parent company representatives are going to love this," Sutton said, checking her phone for updates from Chelsea. Nothing makes corporate headquarters happier than discovering they've been funding someone's personal dating service through the company expense account. The beautiful irony was that Marlo's promotion party had become her termination party, attended by all the right people to make it official. The champagne Griffin had brought was probably still chilling in the conference room, a perfect metaphor for celebrations that never happen. My phone buzzed with a text from Chelsea. Board meeting called for Monday morning. Marlo's office being packed tonight. Security reviewing all keycard access for the past 6 months. This is insane. The domino effect was spectacular to watch. As word spread through the building that Marlo was being terminated for professional misconduct, the men who'd been competing for her attention suddenly found themselves competing for plausible explanations. Derek's project assignments were being reviewed, Marcus's client relationships were being questioned, and Griffin, sweet, naive Griffin, was about to discover that being someone's favorite has consequences when that someone becomes persona non grata. But the real masterpiece of corporate justice was yet to be revealed. Sutton's phone rang, and she answered with barely contained glee. "You're kidding," she said. "All of them? How is that even possible?" She hung up and turned to me with the kind of smile that comes from watching the universe deliver perfect justice. "Remember how Marlo was so confident about her promotion? Well, it turns out the board has been reconsidering several recent personnel decisions based on new information about how those decisions were influenced. The new information, of course, was the detailed documentation of how professional advancement had become personal reward in Marlo's department. Every promotion she'd recommended, every project assignment she'd made, every performance evaluation she'd submitted was now being reviewed through the lens of her personal relationships with the recipients. Griffin's recent performance reviews, which had mysteriously improved over the past 6 months despite no measurable change in his actual performance, were suddenly being questioned. His assignment to high-profile projects that he was arguably underqualified for was being reevaluated. The recommendation letter Marlo had written supporting his request for a salary increase was now evidence of preferential treatment. At 9:30, Griffin finally made it to his car. He sat there for 10 minutes, staring at his steering wheel like it held the answers to life's biggest questions. His phone kept buzzing, probably his colleagues trying to figure out what had happened and whether they needed to update their resumes. I watched my husband of 8 years processing the reality that his affair hadn't just cost him his marriage, it had potentially cost him his career. The woman he'd thought was his ticket to executive success had actually been his ticket to professional scrutiny, and the evening he'd planned as his romantic breakthrough had become his corporate breakdown. The parking garage was emptying as the various players in tonight's drama made their exits. Derek drove away in his BMW like he was fleeing a crime scene. Marcus sat in his truck, making what appeared to be very difficult phone calls, probably to his wife, definitely to his lawyer. But the most satisfying moment came when Marlo finally emerged from the building, escorted by security to her car. Her confident CEO stride had been replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone who'd just learned that actions have consequences. The woman who'd spent 2 years playing corporate chess had just been checkmated by simple documentation and perfect timing. As Sutton and I watched Marlo's Porsche disappear into the Dallas night, probably headed toward a very uncomfortable conversation with her own husband, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete satisfaction. "You know what the best part is?" I said, gathering our empty popcorn containers. "We didn't have to do anything except make sure the right people knew what was already happening." Griffin finally started his car and drove home to what was about to become a very different conversation than the one he'd been planning. The man who'd left that evening believing he was securing his future was returning to discover he'd actually dismantled it, piece by expensive piece. The beautiful thing about truth is that it doesn't need orchestration. It just needs opportunity. And sometimes, that opportunity comes wrapped in perfect timing and tied with a bow made of corporate accountability. Griffin arrived home at 10:47 that night, and the sound of his Tesla pulling into our driveway was like listening to reality finally come knocking. I was sitting in our living room, perfectly composed, with divorce papers spread across the coffee table like a business proposal. Because that's exactly what this had become: the dissolution of a partnership that had clearly run its course. The look on Griffin's face when he walked through the door was priceless. Here was a man who'd left 8 hours earlier convinced he was the protagonist in his own romantic drama, only to discover he'd actually been a supporting character in someone else's corporate thriller. The roses were gone, the champagne was gone, and judging by his expression, his delusions about his importance in Marlo's world had evaporated somewhere between the 15th floor and the parking garage. "Monroe," he started, but I held up a hand. "Before you begin whatever explanation you've been rehearsing for the past hour," I said, "let me save us both some time. Your affair with Marlo Davidson is over, not because you've suddenly developed ethics, but because Marlo Davidson no longer has a job. Your relationship with Davidson and Associates is also under review, considering your performance evaluations and project assignments are now being scrutinized for evidence of favoritism. And your marriage to me officially ended 3 weeks ago when I decided to stop pretending I didn't notice you'd been auditioning for someone else's life. The beautiful thing about having all the information is that it eliminates the need for dramatic confrontations. Griffin couldn't deny, deflect, or gaslight his way out of a situation where the facts were already established and the consequences were already in motion. "How did you," he began, "know about your midlife crisis masquerading as a career opportunity? Griffin, you bought Italian leather shoes and started using pocket squares. You began reading Harvard Business Review and listening to leadership podcasts. You developed opinions about wine pairings and restaurant atmospheres. The only thing more obvious would have been if you'd gotten a red sports car and started working out." What followed was exactly what you'd expect from a man whose entire fantasy had collapsed in the span of 2 hours. Denial, justification, attempts to minimize the situation, and finally, the predictable claim that he'd never meant for things to go so far. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Griffin said, slumping into the chair across from me. "Marlo said she saw potential in me that nobody else recognized. She made me feel important, valued, like I could actually achieve something significant. And that feeling was worth 8 years of marriage and potentially your entire career?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Here's what I learned about affairs during those 3 weeks of investigation. They're rarely about love and almost never about the other person being better than the spouse. They're about feeling special, chosen, important in a way that everyday life doesn't provide. Griffin didn't fall for Marlo because she was superior to me. He fell for the version of himself that she reflected back to him. The divorce proceedings were refreshingly straightforward. Griffin's attempts to claim half of our assets were complicated by the fact that his job security had become questionable and his legal expenses were mounting. Marlo's termination had triggered an investigation into all her professional relationships, and Griffin was facing potential disciplinary action for accepting preferential treatment. Sutton, meanwhile, was promoted to regional director within 6 weeks of Marlo's departure. Turns out, when you remove someone who's been manipulating project assignments and personnel decisions for personal gain, the people with actual talent and work ethic rise to the surface pretty quickly. The corporate fallout was spectacular and swift. Davidson and Associates implemented new policies regarding supervisor-subordinate relationships, expense account oversight, and performance evaluation protocols. The parent company sent in auditors who discovered that Marlo's department had been operating like a personal kingdom, with resources allocated based on loyalty rather than results. Griffin eventually kept his job, but his trajectory at Davidson and Associates flatlined permanently. The man who'd dreamed of executive promotion found himself back in his original role, with his every decision scrutinized and his professional credibility damaged beyond repair. The Italian shoes and power ties remained, but they now looked like costumes for a play that had closed permanently. 6 months later, I'm living in a downtown Dallas loft that I absolutely love, working for a marketing firm that actually values my contributions, and dating a guy who thinks I'm interesting enough without needing external validation to prove it. Sutton and I still meet for coffee, but now our conversations focus on her new responsibilities rather than documenting someone else's misconduct. The most satisfying part isn't that Griffin lost his fantasy relationship, it's that he lost it in exactly the way he deserved. Not through dramatic confrontation or tearful revelations, but through the simple application of professional standards and corporate accountability. His affair ended not because love conquered all, but because expense reports conquered fantasy. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just making sure the truth has perfect timing. And sometimes, the most important thing you can learn from a failing marriage is that you're actually much more interesting on your own than you ever were as half of someone else's mediocre whole. Griffin thought he was upgrading his life. Instead, he taught me that I'd been downgrading mine for years. And that's a lesson worth every Italian leather shoe in Dallas.